Hi folks, it's Matt Lawrence here. I'm the COO at Easy Agile, and I'm really excited today to be joined by Ray Arell. Before we jump into our podcast episode, Easy Agile would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land from which we're broadcasting today, the people of the Gadigal speaking country. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that same respect to all Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander and First Nations people joining us today. Ray, thanks for joining us today. Ray is a collaborative and inclusive leader who loves to inspire and motivate others to achieve their full potential. Ray has 30 years of experience building and leading outstanding multinational teams in Fortune 100 companies, non-profits and startups. Also, he's recognized as a leading expert in large-scale agile adoptions, engineering practices, lean and complex adaptive systems. So Ray, welcome. Really glad to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you.
I'd love to get started by understanding what you enjoy most about being an inclusive leader and working with teams.
Yeah, so I've been in leadership probably for about 15 years, leading teams at different sizes. You know, when you have the more intimate, smaller teams of maybe 5 or 6 people, upwards of teams that are upwards of several hundred people working within an organization that I might be the leader of. And what I enjoy the most about it is just connecting with the talented people that do the work. I mean, when you go into leadership, one of the things that you kind of transition from is not being the expert person in the room that's coding or doing hardware development or something else. You have these people who are now looking for direction or vision or other things in order for them to give them purpose, in order to kind of move forward with their day. And I enjoy coaching. I enjoy mentoring. I mean, a lot of my technical side of me is more nostalgia now, more than it is, relevant with the latest technologies. But it's still, there's something rewarding when you see somebody who can, if you think of Daniel Pink's work of autonomy, mastery, and purpose, that they suddenly find that they are engaged with the purpose that we're doing as an organization, and then the autonomy for them to just do their day and be able to work and collaborate with others. And that's always been exciting to me.
I can relate to that. I think in our audience today, we're going to have a mixture of emerging leaders, aspiring leaders, and experienced leaders. I'd love to tap into your experience and ideally rewind a little bit to earlier in your career when you were transitioning into being a leader. And I'd love to understand around that time, what were some of the successes that you saw in the approach that you take that you've been trying to repeat over the years?
Well, I think early on, especially when you grow up through the technical ranks and suddenly, at least the company that I was with at the time, very expert-based culture. If you were the smartest person in the room, those are the people that they looked at and said, okay, we're going to promote you to lead, or we're going to promote you to manager, or promote you into the leadership ranks. I think looking back on that, I think, Ray 2.0 or Ray, 3.0, whatever version I was at the time, that, I very much led from that expert leadership stance, which is sort of, I know what is the best way to go and approach the delivery of something. And everyone should be following my technical lead for however this product comes together. And I don't think that was really a good approach. I think that constrained people because you ended up being more or less just telling people what to go do versus allowing them to experiment and learn and grow themselves in order to become, what I had become, as a senior technical person. And so I think lesson learned number one was that leading a team from an expert slant, I think, is probably not the best approach in order, if you're going, especially if you think of Agile and other more inclusive teamwork type of projects, you're going to want to give people more of a catalytic or a catalyst leader type of synergistic based leadership style. so that they can self-organize and they can move forward and learn and grow as an engineer.
Are there any times that stand out for you where you got it horribly wrong? I know I've got a few stories which I can happily share as well.
I'd love to hear some of yours. I think horribly wrong, I think is, and is the question is anything ever really not fixable, not recoverable? And in most cases, most of the issues that we've dealt with were recoverable. I think that looking at, and again, kind of back into that stance of, well, am I creating a team or am I creating just a group of individuals that are just taking, their work from the manager and, I'm passing them out like cards, type of thing. I think early on, probably the big mistake was just being too controlling. And the mistake of that control meant that I couldn't have a vacation. Others were dependent versus being, interdependent on one another. And I think that made the organization run slower and not as efficient as it could be.
I've certainly been guilty of that same approach earlier in my leadership career, where I became the bottleneck. Absolutely. Yeah, and
exactly.
Recognize that it can be quite hard to undo, but it's definitely worth persevering with. Something else that I learned, I was fortunate to get some training in situational leadership, probably nearly 10 years ago now. And that really opened my eyes to an approach. The way I was treating different people in my team, but I was treating them the way I first judged them. So if I saw them an expert and a master, I would treat them as an expert and master in all things. And equally, if someone was less capable at that point in their career, I would kind of assume the same thing. And so I would apply the same level of direction or lack of direction to those people for everything. And in situational leadership, the premise for those who don't know at home is you change the level of direction that you give depending on the task at hand. Have you used that approach or something similar to guide how you include people in different ways?
Well, in order to include people, I think part of it is you need to kind of, as you said, you were situationally looking at each person, and you were structuring it in a way that was, from a way and approach of very individualized with somebody. I think the philosophy that not everyone is very open or can communicate very well about, their skills and their strengths. Or in certain cases, some people are, they might be good at something, but they don't exercise it because they themselves feel that that's not one of their strengths. So, but in reality, as it is. So I think that when you're saying from a situational leadership perspective, when you hear somebody place doubt in that they could be the one that could do something or to take up, say, even leadership of something, I think part of that just gets into that whole coaching and mentoring and really setting it up and helping them to be successful through that. And I think from an inclusive perspective, I think there's a set of honesty that you have to bring into your work and humility about, being humble about, even what you've accomplished. Because in engineering in particular, you tend to see that when you put people into a room, the people who are newer will sit back and they will yield to who they think has the more experience. And reality is that they came from, say, let's say they just got fresh out of college. They actually might have more skills in a particular area based upon what they just went through in their curriculum that we might not have. And so the question of how do we use the whole organizational brain in order to kind of bring, all of the ideas onto the table, I think at times it requires us to be able to be effective listeners and to sometimes just pause and allow people to kind of have the floor and pick up the pen and not hog the space, if that makes sense.
It really does, and I think I've seen that in every company I've worked in to some level. I'd be really interested to tap into how you go about addressing that scenario. So for the people who are listening that would face that situation,
Sure.
it might be the first time they've been a leader and seeing that scenario and observing it. And is there any advice you would give them to help change that dynamic?
Well, one, just becoming aware of it. I frequently doodle when I'm in a group of people, and what I'll do is I'll sit there and I'll put dots on a paper of where people are at in the room, and then I start drawing lines between, those individual dots if I see the communication happening between certain players. And what's interesting is if you watch that over about a 15-minute period of time, you start to see this emergent pattern that maybe someone's domineering the conversation, or they're the focus point of the conversation, and it isn't going around the full room. So then that's when you get to be a gatekeeper, and you invite others into the conversation, and then you politely help the ones who are being dominant in the conversation to pause, to just give space and allow those other people to talk and to get that out. And then I think the question of whether or not what the person says may sometimes be coherent or not coherent to the conversation, or maybe they're still trying to learn about just dynamics of everything. You just have to help to get that out of people, and use open words to basically open questions to kind of pull that out from them. And I think that works really well.
I love that. I'm a doodler as well. I'm an artist originally in my early career, and I worked my way into solving problems through tech a long time ago now, but I still can't, I need that physical drawing, to help my mind think as much as anything else. So those are much use than just doodling on a pad.
Same here.
So yeah. Something that you said a little earlier, we touched a little bit on inclusivity. In your LinkedIn bio, you talk about being an inclusive leader who loves to inspire and motivate others to achieve their full potential. Something I'm really passionate about is that last part in particular, is helping people achieve their full potential. It's why I love being a people leader and a COO. You get to do that across a whole company. I'd love to first touch on the idea of being an inclusive leader. How do you define what it means to be one?
Well, inclusive leadership, there was an old bag that I used to have, a little coaching bag that I used to carry around with me, and at the very top of it, it said "Take it to the team," was the motto that was at the top of it, and at the bottom of the bag, it basically said "Treat people like adults." Were the two kind of core things that I think part of what being inclusive is that I have to accept the fact that I'm a smart person, but do we get a better decision if we socialize that around the team? Do we see what other ideas or possibility thinking? Sort of in the lean sense, make the decision as late as you can. It's more towards the Eastern culture of, well, if I keep the decision open, maybe we're going to find something that's cheaper or better, or even just, more exciting for our customers. And so I think part of that is knowing that you don't have to be the one that has to make the decision. You can let the team make the decision. And we all embrace, because we're empowering ourselves with, this was what we all thought, not just what Ray thought, which I think is cool.
There's a second part to that piece you talk about in your bio around helping motivate others to achieve their full potential. I'd love to know where that came from for you, that passion, and what are some of the ways you look to help emerging leaders reach their full potential?
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky enough when I joined Intel Corporation that Andy Grove was still running the organization at the time. As a matter of fact, he taught my welcome to Intel class. We were at the time when I joined Intel, there was only about 32,000 employees. And, here's the CEO, founder of the company teaching the welcome to Intel class, which I thought was incredibly cool, a great experience to have. And, he really was, he oozed, this leadership, whatever mojo or whatever it is he's got going out into the environment, as he's talking about the company. But he was really strong on the one-on-ones, the time that you can spend with your manager or others within the organization, because you can have a one-on-one with anyone within the company. And he encouraged that. And I think that helps to when somebody is trying to figure it out, they're brand new to the company, and you get a standing invitation from the CEO that says, you can come and have a conversation with me. I think that sets the cultural norm right up front, that this is a place that's going to assist and help, me along my career. And I can tell you that there's been a number of different times that those developed into full-blown, I'm the mentee and they're the mentors. And in those relationships over time, it's sort of like, then you say, well, I'm going to pay that forward. And I start to, like today I have, at least 6 or 7 mentees that have all sorts of questions about how do they guide through their career, or if they had some specific area that they wanted to go focus on. And we, it's their time to pick my brain. And in certain cases, if I don't have the full answer, I can guide them to other mentors that can help them to grow.
But I love that approach of pay it forward that you touched on there. It's definitely something that I've been trying to do in the last couple of years myself. Yeah. And I wish I'd started sooner mentoring. I've had the privilege of working with some amazing leaders in my career who I've learned a lot from. And once I started mentoring, I realized how much I learned by being a mentor, because you have to think, you have to really think about what these people are going through and not just project yourself onto them. And yes, it validates the rationale about why you do things yourself, why you think that way. And it forces me to challenge myself. And I think if there's anything, I talk to some of the younger people at work who are emerging leaders, and they're exceptional in their own way. They've all got very different backgrounds, but a lot of them don't feel like they're ready to be a mentor. And they really are. They're amazing people. And I wonder, have you seen people earlier in their careers try and pass it forwards kind of early on, or do people feel they have to wait until?
I think it depends. I think, one, I think the education system, at least in the United States, has shifted a bit. When people go for their undergraduate degree, it used to be just they were by themselves. They did their book studies. Very little interaction or teamwork was created, for the study. I mean, back when I, got my electrical engineering degree, that was just, it was just a, me by myself. There might be occasional, lab work and lab projects, but it wasn't something that was very much inclusive, nor did they have people step up into leadership roles that early. I look at now, my daughter, who's right now, going to the university, and everything is a cohort group. There's cohorts that are getting together. The studying that they do, they each have to pick up leadership in some regards for some aspect of a project that they're working on. So I think some of the the newer people coming into the workforce are sort of built in with the skills to, if they need to take up leadership of something, run a little program, run a project, they've been equipped to do it. At least that's what I've seen.
I'd love that concept. Something that I've been observing and I talk about a lot with our leadership team, and but I mentor exec teams for startups and scale-ups as well. And
Sure.
a lot of the conversation that comes up is around team dynamics, team trust, agility within teams, and to generally try and empower teams, set them up so they can be autonomous, they are truly empowered, and they're trusted to make great decisions and drive work forwards. You've got a lot of experience in Agile and Agile Transformations, Agile leader. In your experience leading Agile teams, those adoptions and those transformations, I'd love to understand if you see there's a connection between being Agile as a team and those traits that an inclusive leader will have. Is there a connection there in your mind between what it means to be Agile and be an inclusive leader?
I think so, because I mean, if you think of, early on, they established that servant leadership was a better leadership style for Agile teams. And so I think when we talk about transformation, some of the biggest failures that occur tend to be more based upon not Agile, but on issues of trust and other sort of organizational impediments that had already existed there before they got started. And if they don't address those, their Agile journey is painful. I've heard people say that they've gotten scrummed before, using it in a really kind of derogatory way of thinking that, well, instead of getting a team of empowered people to go do work within the Scrum framework, they end up being put under a micromanagement lens because the culture of the manager didn't shift, and the manager is using it as a daily way to making sure that everyone is working at 120%. Versus what we should be seeing in the pattern is that the team understands their flow. They're pulling work into the team. It's not being pushed. And those dynamics, I think, are something that if leadership doesn't shift and change the way that they work, then it just doesn't work in organizations. In
the many places that you've worked and coached and guided people on, you started to come across, there's a term that we've started to use of Agile natives, where people who've really not known any different. There's so many companies in the world are going through Agile transformations, and that'll continue for a long time. But as some companies are kind of born with agility at the forefront, have you experienced many people coming through into leadership roles that don't know anything but true agility and really authentic agility, as you've just described?
Well, I think it's kind of interesting because as you talked about that phrase, I was thinking about it, well, if you knew nothing else, but I can also say that you could become native after you've been in the culture for a period of time as well. So you can eventually, that becomes your first reaction, your first habit is pulling more from the Agile principles than you would be pulling from something else. There are those people, but it's been interesting watching like companies like Spotify, or watching Salesforce, or watching Pivotal, and I can just kind of go down the list of companies that have been through, started as an Agile organization. They got large, and then suddenly the anti-patterns of a large company start to emerge within those companies. So even though the people within the smaller, tribe, are working in an Agile way, the company slowly doesn't start to work in an Agile way any longer. It falls underneath a kind of a larger context of what we see happening with the older companies. And I think some of that could be, the executive culture might be just coming in where they bring somebody from the outside who wasn't a native, and they have a hard time dealing with the notion that, well, we're committing to a delivery date sometime over here, and we think we're going to hit it, but no, we don't have what would be affectionately known as a 90% confident plan that says that we've cleared all risk out of the way. And yeah, it's going to absolutely happen on that day, and some of those companies get really, they feel that they have to commit everything to the street, and if they don't meet it, they've already glued those in to some executive bonus program that ends up driving bad behaviors, unfortunately.
Yes, I have seen that. What is the? I'm assuming that in our audience we're going to have people who are transitioning into more senior leadership roles. They're not emerging because they've been doing it for a while, and they've probably run some successful agile teams at the smaller level as you described. But those people who are moving into the more senior roles, maybe into exec positions, is there any guidance that you give them for navigating that change and trying to maintain true agile principles and what it means to be agile as you in those more senior roles?
Yeah, I think part of it is the work that you did as a smaller team. Everything still, can scale up. And I hate to use the word scale because I think scale is kind of people kind of use it. What would be the right word? It's misused in our industry. I think values and principles are scale free. You can still walk each day, walking into your team and still embracing those 12 principles. And you're going to do good work. The question is, though, is if you're doing that at the lower level, say with a Kanban board, the question is, what does it look like when you're at your executive desk? What is the method that you go pull? If you look at most of the scaled frameworks that are out today, there's very little guidance that's given to what should be in the day in the life of an agile executive. What should that look like? And for me, if I think about, business, the business team, the management team is working with the delivery teams daily. They should be doing that. So what are you going to put in place for that to facilitate and occur? What are you going to do about, stop doing these big annual budget processes? Embrace things like the beyond budgeting or other things where you're funding the organization strategically, and you're not trying to lock everything in on a one annual cadence, but yet your organization beneath is working every 2 weeks. So you should be able to remove your bets within your organization based upon the performance of each sprint. Can you do that? The last one is probably the most important one, is impediments. And that is, how fast does it take information to go from the lowest part of the organization to the highest point of the organization? And if that takes 3 weeks, 2 weeks, or even sometimes later for certain organizations, optimize that. How do you optimize an impediment that you can personally help to go remove for people so that they don't, they're not slowed down by it any longer, whatever that might be?
You're touching on something there, which I think is a fundamental part of being agile, which is that ability to learn and adapt. And you can only learn when you are aware of what's happening around you. You can observe to it.
Well, I said something a couple of months ago, and everyone just went, oh, why did you say? I can't believe you said that out loud. It's the quiet stuff out loud sometimes. And we were trying to get a meeting together to go fix one of these impediments, and all of the senior leadership was busy. They were busy. And my question is, if this isn't the most important thing right now for us, what do you do? What's your job? What are you doing in your day if this one isn't the highest priority that you walk into? And, the questioning senior leaders that maybe they're not paying attention to the right things, and sometimes speaking that truth to power is something we have to do every once in a while.
I agree. That level of candor is definitely required at all levels, and being able to receive that feedback so you can learn and adapt as an individual, as we were talking about earlier, about being adaptive as a leader, but yeah, also as a team.
Right.
There's a point that I'd like to touch on before we wrap up, which is as you climb up the career ladder and you get into a more senior position and you become responsible for a broader range of things, particularly as you start reaching that executive level. I've witnessed people struggle with the transition from being the person, as you talked about right at the start of this discussion, being that person who knows everything and who can direct and have all the answers, into someone who, where I see your job changes to being the person who can identify what we know least about, what we as an exec team know least, where we have the least confidence, where we see those impediments and we don't know what to do with them. How do you go about guiding people to embrace that? Because I think what I see is the fear that comes with that, almost a fear of exposure of, oh, I'm admitting people I don't know what I'm doing, and I've been rewarded through my entire career by becoming more of an expert, and suddenly my job is to be the person who's confident enough to call out, this is what we don't understand yet, let's get together and try and resolve it. When the risk is greater, the impact is greater, and you're responsible for all things, how do you help people transition into that higher level role?
Well, I think part of it is, can they let go of that technical side? Having to have their hands dirty all the time. And I've seen certain leaders that, really somebody needs to go back and say, are you really sure that this is the career that you're wanting to go to? You seem to be more into wanting to be into the nuts and bolts of things. And maybe that's the best place for you because you feel more comfortable in that space. The other aspect, though, as they transition, I think is, again, trust becomes critical. Trust the people that are working for you, that they're not coming in and being lazy, and you have to, go look over their shoulders all the time because you feel that they might not be being productive or other things. You have to have the ability to say that, look, the people that you hired are talented and they are moving us towards our goals. I think what becomes more critical for the health of the organization is that you have to do a much better job at actually saying, okay, well, here is our vision, whether it be a product vision, whether it be the company's vision, whatever that might be, helping people to understand what that North Star is. And then reinforcing that, not from a perspective of yourself, but a perspective from the customer. And I think this is where a lot of companies start to drift because they start to optimize some internal metric that'll build efficiency within your organization. But what does the customer think? And constantly being able to represent, as if you think of from an agile perspective, the chief product owner of the organization, to be able to represent, this is what the customers need and want, and to be able to voice that in the vision and the ambitious missions that are set up for the organization. Make it real for people. And then the last part of that is, not everything is going to happen and come true. If you read most executives, bios, it's there's lots and lots and lots and lots of mistakes. There's and I remember this of one leader. He was retiring, and I thought this was the most awkward time that he actually did this. He actually went up on the stage and he talked about his biggest failure. Now, throughout my career working with this person, I always wondered whether or not they were human, and then on the day of this person's exit, they finally decided to give you a few stories about mistakes that they made. And I think that he really needed to share those stories much, much earlier, because I think people would have probably found they would have been a little bit stressed working around him. And it would also show some vulnerability, for you as a leader to say that you don't have everything figured out, and sometimes it's just a guess. We think that this is where the product needs to go. And then as soon as you put it in front of the customers, they're going to tell you whether or not, if you take like the Kano model and suddenly you're going to hit, this is the most exciting thing since sliced bread. Are they going to love it, or are they going to go, oh, yeah, this is a product right there. I'll take it if it's free. You get into this situation where it's like, well, we can't charge as much, but I think those stories become important and anchor organizations. I think it also, one other aspect to this is I think that by having somebody who's approachable and can relay those stories effectively into the organization, and talk about these things, I think then that opens the door for everyone else to do it as well. Because like it or not, humans are hierarchical in the way that we think about things. A lot of people manage up. So they mimic leaders, so be that leader that somebody would want to mimic,
I think that's great advice, Ray. The connection that's run through this whole conversation is around authentically engaging with your work authentically, whether it's the team that you're trying to lead, whether it's the agile practices at whatever scale and level that you're operating at, and to build that trust to enable that to work requires that level of authenticity.
Yeah, exactly.
I would love, as we wrap up, for you to leave any final tips or advice for both current and emerging leaders on that topic. If there's a way beyond just sharing your own personal stories, how would you advise people? What will you leave them with to build some trust in their teams?
Well, a couple things. Number one, you have to be mindful about who you are as a person. Again, like I was saying, that people manage up, and if you send out an email at 3:00 in the morning and 5 minutes later your people were responding to you, then you're not being a really good role model of a good work-life balance. So a lot of your tendencies will bleed off into the organization. So regardless how you assess yourself, do an assessment of your leadership, where you think it is. Harvard Business Review a long time ago, put off the levels of what they saw as leadership models, and the lowest level is the expert and the achiever-based leaders. And if you're one of those are not very conducive to a good agile or collaborative culture. So if you're currently setting in that slant, then you should look at ways of being able to move yourself more to a catalytic or a synergistic based leader. And that journey is not an easy one, because I went through that myself. It took years in order to kind of pull away from some of those tendencies that you had as an expert leader. And as an example, an expert-based leader tends to only talk to other experts. They don't if they perceive somebody not to be an expert or something, they tend to discount those individuals and not engage with them. And so again, the full organizational brain is what's going to solve the problem. So how do you engage the entire organization and pull those ideas together? The other one is that as you go into, from an emergent leader perspective, I think you said it yourself earlier, and that's not just the bias of you're not an expert, I'm not going to talk to you, but any bias that you might have can affect the way that you lead and judge an individual, and really could limit or grow their career based upon maybe a snap judgment that you might have had. So I think you have to be mindful of your decisions that you're taking within the organization, and especially the ones you're making of people. And so you got to be careful of those. The last one is probably just, and this gets into the complex adaptive system space. Not everything is cut and dry, black and white, are mechanistic, meaning that we can take the same product, redo it again and again and again, and we're going to get different answers. We're going to get different requirements. We're going to get different things. It's okay for that stuff to be there, and it's okay for the stuff that's coming out of our products to be different every once in a while, and specifically because it's a very complex environment. Cause and effect relationships and complexity is customer can change their mind, and we have to be comfortable with a customer changing their mind. Our customer might have new needs that come up, and likewise, our employees. They sometimes will have, change of thought or change of what they are excited about. How do you encourage that? How do you grow those individuals to retain them in the company, not to use them for the skill they have right now, but how do you play the long game there? And I know I'm getting a little long-winded here, but the thing that I see most, even with all the layoff notices that are going on right now, is that's companies not playing the long game. I think that's a bad move, because all you're doing by letting an employee go is enabling your competitor, with a whole bunch of knowledge that you should be retaining. So anyway, I'll cut it short there.
Ray, thank you for sharing your wisdom with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed the chat. So yes, thank you for joining me on the Easy Agile podcast.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.